Where was the inspiration? When did you start writing, and what hole were you trying to fill with this book?
Well, I've been looking at energy issues at The Economist for a decade, and my colleague Ian is our planes, trains, and automobiles guy for a long time, and we found ourselves constantly helping each other with story ideas, working together on collaborative pieces. Because after all, you can't really talk too much about cars without talking about engines and fuels, because after all, they're symbiotic twins. I mean, they've been joined at the hip for 100 years. Why not look at them from that perspective? And that was the beginning of Zoom.
Okay. And Zoom, because this is all speeding up so quickly now, or because we're going to have to move so quickly from now on, or?
Both. I think that the scale of the challenges is now quite apparent, and there's not much controversy, whether it's the problems of climate change and related environmental difficulties, or we're talking about the geopolitics of oil and what that means for politics, the economic shocks that could come. These sort of twin dangers that arise from being addicted to oil, I think, call for more urgency. But at the same time, what are years of reportage on the front lines, actually out there talking to big oil bosses and car company executives and entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, people who are involved in clean energy in Brazil and India and China, as well as dirty energy, persuaded us that in fact the Zoom is already happening, that we're already seeing extraordinary innovations coming up, and they're going to hit the mainstream quite soon.
Vijay, you say in your book that a world without cars would be a dim, joyless place with much diminished freedom, mobility, and prosperity. So I think Americans are going to be really happy. They've been told, bike, don't drive, walk, don't drive. I think a lot of people will be really happy to hear, no, you don't. America doesn't have to fall out of love with the automobile. Is that a big part of what you're trying to communicate here?
What I'm trying to say is that if we take the problem seriously, that is, again, broadly speaking, climate change and environmental problems on one hand, the geopolitical complications of relying on a fuel that comes from a particular part of the world, the Middle East, where 2/3 of all the world's conventional oil still resides. If this is the very complicated set of problems, which is now, I would argue, the main challenge of the 21st century, only made worse by a rising India and China, where everyone is jumping into cars and using more energy, right? If this is what we're trying to solve, coming into it with a lot of ideological baggage about why SUVs are evil and why we should all be riding bicycles, I think that doesn't actually help us accelerate to solutions. On the contrary, precisely because in America, we spent 100 years building out our energy infrastructure, our suburban sprawl. I don't like the exurbs any more than anyone. I don't even have a car. I live in Manhattan and I use public transport, which is great. But I don't have a problem with the car. What I have a problem with is when I look at these problems of local pollution and asthma rates in children going up, when I look at climate change, the geopolitical complications, how much gasoline price rises are hurting the pocketbooks of ordinary Americans. What I say is the problem is oil, and clean cars that go beyond oil will be part of the solution. And that's part of the thesis. The second thing is, I don't think Americans will live like the Japanese. I think it's fundamentally, maybe some people will, and I encourage them. I live like a Japanese person. I live in a small apartment, very energy efficient, in Manhattan. But asking every American to live that way is a guarantee of failure of any attempt at energy policy reform. So I would say leave the ideological baggage at the door and say, how can we solve problems? Well, technologies can help us. Public policies are necessary. Individual action and mobilization, which the book talks a lot about, is the key to stimulating that change. But again, only if we leave preconceived notions of left and right, environmentalism versus business at the doorstep, and then we can begin to craft interesting new coalitions that will help us find solutions.